So we are back with another 90 Day Fiancé The Other Way recap. In this video, we're going to be diving into episodes 4 through 7. If you'd like to see my other video where we discuss the first 3 episodes, I'll link that in the corner for you. Now let's get right into our couples. First being Greta and Matthew. So Greta gets on her flight to England and she has to board the train to get to Leicestershire? How do you even say that? Sorry if I'm botching it. But it's in the countryside, and when she arrives, in a joking way, he basically tells her that she needs to take a shower because clearly that trip was pretty long. But then when she gets to his parents' house where he's currently living, she notices that he doesn't even have a space kind of carved out for her to put her clothes and shoes. It just seems like he did less than the bare minimum, really. So his parents arrive later that evening and they're very warm and welcoming. They even went out and got a vegan cake to celebrate her arrival. There was clearly a lot more thought put in on their side than Matthew's, in my opinion. But Matthew doesn't see it as that big of a deal. He just kind of thinks if she wants a space that she'll just have to clear out what she needs to and make the room. But who wants to do that after spending over 15 plus hours traveling, Matthew? Like, really, think about it. But at least the next day he tries to surprise her with something nice. This time it was a trip to the nearby spa, and Greta was really enjoying that because that's something that she likes to do to treat herself back home. The only thing is that Matthew doesn't really do this type of thing usually. This was just for her. So this is when she tells him that, back in Oklahoma, she gets weekly massages, which he thinks is a bit too much. So now they've made it to yet another disagreement because he thinks that there needs to be a realistic cap on certain things that she wants if he's going to be the main breadwinner until Greta is able to practice law in the UK. But Greta starts bringing up the purchases that he made recently, such as a new engine for the car and a new computer. So even though Greta, like she says, isn't really asking for much, what she is asking for can be a little expensive to do every single week when you're trying to make one income stretch for 2 people now. It was fine when it was just her relying on her one income back in Oklahoma and she only had her pet to take care of, but now they both have more to consider than just themselves. So next we have Anthony and Manon. So now that Anthony and Manon are in Marseille, they are now staying at her parents' house in one of their spare rooms until they can find a place of their own, but the room is pretty small and cramped. And they get into another argument again about the whole overworking situation where Manon was constantly working and Matthew was doing most of the work with raising their son. So he feels underappreciated in a sense, but she feels like she was doing her best to make him feel appreciated. And it just seems like they could really use this hard reset. So the next day, they all go out with Manon's parents to play some pétanque, which is what she remembers playing with her parents growing up. And it starts off fun and cool, but then she ends up in a little bit of an exchange with her parents because she felt like they didn't really support her when she was being bullied and talked about because of her weight. Now, ultimately, this was one of the main reasons that she didn't want to stay in France, along with a few others, but eventually they reach a resolve. Now the next day, Manon and Anthony get a car for them to use because her dad's car is pretty tight. She's also been pushing him to speak more French to get him a little more comfortable with it, which is great because he's going to be living there. Obviously he's going to need to speak the language, but he's really happy to see Manon really bonding more with their son. But she does kind of kill the mood when she says that she has a new business idea for a small business. So of course he's looking at her like, girl, seriously? The whole reason they were leaving the US was to have a slower pace when it came to their lifestyles and to enjoy more family time, but now she's talking about starting another business. Yeah, but she claims this time is going to be different because if it turns out to be too much for her and is stressing her out, then she'll stop. But Anthony is still worried because he sees this as another reason for Manon to be pulled away from the family, but Manon is convinced that she can balance both this time, so we'll see. Next we have Patia and Dylan. So both Patia and Dylan are exotic dancers that work in clubs. She started back when she was 21 years old in 1989 just because she needed money, and now decades later she's still doing her thing. Dylan, on the other hand, is a plumber by day that works for himself and a dancer by night. He's from Australia and he got a call years ago to participate in Australia's Got Talent in Las Vegas, and that's when he met Patia. She had apparently moved to Las Vegas because her love life was a mess and she was separating from her second husband at the time. Now, one night while she was working, Dylan had come out to the club that Patia was working at, and it was love at first boob sight, she says, because she claims he fell in love with her tatas first and then her personality. But there's also a 20-year age gap between them, but she claims he he has an old soul. However, they've been on and off with each other for 12 years. But Patia did eventually move back to her original home in Texas, but now she's moving to Tasmania to be with Dylan. Apparently, a few years ago, she has done this before for him, where she sold everything she had, packed up a suitcase, and headed to Thailand to be with him there. And that lasted for about a year, and then things just didn't work out. They were constantly fighting, button heads, and eventually they just kind of broke up, and she came back to the US to go back to dancing. And if I were her, I would have made him sacrifice things this time instead of trying to do this again and potentially have it not work out again. But even her nephew, who's pretty close to her, is super nervous about the whole thing, considering that Dylan has even proposed to her at one point but decided to take the ring back. And also, with them being both dancers, they would often get into fights because of jealousy and whatnot, and he would be the one to always question things about their relationship. But she wholeheartedly believes that this time everything is going to work out and he's going to propose. But she says that if it doesn't, that she's going to move on this time. But she goes over to Tasmania. But I find it interesting that he also recognizes that she's more than likely going to be looking to see that ring back on her hand at some point in the near future. But he says that he's looking to see a few things from her before that happens, to make sure that this is what he wants for the long haul. With one of them being that she's able to adapt to his way of life and not spend so much money all the time, because that's kind of led her to being in a lot of debt in the past. But we'll see how that goes. Next on our list is Chloe and Johnny. So we pretty much left off with Chloe trying to adopt a life in Aruba in Johnny's house, and using a gas stove hasn't really been on her list of enjoyables for sure, but Johnny has to turn it on for her to boil an egg, which I don't know if anyone ever told her that it boils faster. You put a little salt in there and then you put the lid on top. But anyway, Johnny takes Chloe to dinner later that night, where they discuss him potentially leaving his job with the Jolly Pirates excursion crew, mainly because he would eventually want to leave to start his own business or businesses, and also because Chloe gets super jealous about him working around a bunch of girls all the time on these trips. But I'm still a little confused as to what type of business he's looking at starting and including Chloe in, because all he really says is that he wants to do something involving water because he loves being in the water, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot you could do with that, but alright. But things get extra strange when Johnny asks if he could stop sharing his location with her when he gets back to work, and she agrees because she wants to show him that she sorta kinda trusts him. But she still decides to call on one of her friends, who just happens to be the girlfriend of one of Johnny's co-workers. She has a car. They both drive over to what Chloe refers to as her lookout spot to keep an eye on the boat that he works on, because she wanted to see what he was doing and if he was still letting girls get on his back to jump into the water. Now, she had said that she wanted him to stop doing that specifically and wanted him to keep his distance from the girls on the boat entirely, which is probably not going to be possible on a boat. And also, it's his job literally to make sure that the passengers have a good time, so good luck with that one. Next, we have Jenny and Sumit. So Jenny tries her hand at cooking for the family, and she makes spaghetti and sauce because I believe they might be vegetarians, not sure, but there's no meat, just sauce. But there's kind of no complexity to the meal, obviously, and I believe that the sauce was ragu or one of those regular jarred sauces, and the whole family is just looking at her like, yeah, you're gonna have to learn how to cook or clean if you're staying with us, because yeah. But I think she honestly did her best. She probably does not cook often at all. But later on, the family has a more official ceremony for their arrival into their parents' home, which Sumit is kind of shocked by because he never thought that he'd see the day where they did all of this for him and Jenny. But as a part of this whole celebration, the extended family comes over, many of whom Jenny has never met before, and it included Sumit's aunt on his dad's side, and she was not having it when it came to their relationship. She was saying things like, oh, even though y'all are already married, you think that the marriage is gonna stick or be legitimate if society doesn't agree with it? And I'm like, does that matter? Like, what? If you're legally married, you're legally married. Like, that doesn't really change, but okay. But she was just getting super touchy about Sumit's mom helping with making the flowers out of the sand on the floor, and they started talking about Jenny being too old and how Indian society would look at them and treat them because of how old she is. And it was really just the same reaction that Sumit's parents had a while back. It was nothing new, except this time they were actually defending Jenny, which is something that I never thought I'd see, to be honest. It was definitely a win, and the auntie just kind of ended up leaving since she felt so strongly about being there. Nobody was forcing her to stay, so, the door was wide open. Now, a few days after that, they all ended up doing what Sumit calls poop yoga, because they're basically detoxing and doing yoga at the same time, so that was pretty interesting to watch, but you could tell that Jenny definitely was not having a good time. But let's move on to our last couple, which is going to be Luke and Madeleine. So Luke gets to Colombia, surprises Madeleine, and at first she was playing it cool, but then she showed that she was very excited to see that Luke was there before he said he was going to be there. So she welcomes him into the apartment, gets him settled in. But now their wedding planner, she comes over to discuss the payments, because everything has to be paid for by a certain time in order for everything that Madeleine had planned to still take place. So she comes over, but things get really sticky when Luke starts talking about having sent Madeleine money for everything for the wedding, but according to her, some of it was actually for the rent the first time around for the apartment, and he was supposed to send her more money after that to cover the rest of the wedding stuff. Because according to her, at first he had only sent enough for her dress, so she says, but after that they just kind of start arguing in front of the planner, and the planner is just sitting there trying to figure out what to say to ease the tension. But eventually she just leaves and talks about how embarrassed she was watching that, or rather how embarrassing she thought it was for Madeleine. It was just kind of a mess, really. But eventually they come to a compromise in terms of the budget, it seems, and they go out to do some wedding cake tasting, and that's when Luke, in his mind, thought it was going to be a good idea to bring up his bachelor party back in LA. He mentions that his friends threw him a surprise party that he had no idea about, even though Madeleine told him that she wanted to be there with him if he had one, otherwise he couldn't. Which I think is a little too controlling in my opinion. It definitely shows that you really don't trust him, and if that's the case, why are y'all getting married? But anyway, he also told her about the dancer, and that's when she loses it, even though he told her that he didn't touch the girl while she was dancing on him, which if you watch the footage back, he's actually telling the truth, but of course she doesn't believe him. She flips out, she throws the cake in his face. That was just honestly no surprise when it came to her reaction, considering the things that she's done in the past, but she walks off and goes to her car to vent to one of her friends on the phone. Now Luke comes over to get her to just sit and talk to him, but she keeps telling him to go on and be with the dancer, and their wedding was off, relationship was done, and she just drives off without him, leaves him there, and she goes back to her place, packs up all his stuff, and puts it outside. He has to catch a taxi back and sees his stuff out there. He claims he's never seen her this furious, which I don't know if I fully believe considering how easily triggered she is and over the top with her reactions, but regardless, she tells him to get out, and he just stays at a hotel that night. He tries to come back the next day with some flowers, and she just kind of lets him up so that they could talk, or really for Luke to further explain himself, but she's done, it seems. And it just looks as though she's kind of over the whole thing. She doesn't even want him to touch her, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next with them, because this is looking pretty tense. But y'all can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'll catch you all in the next one.